Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. We're now in the third lecture on the series out of 10 on building a worldview slash philosophy. It's an important part of understanding, in that building our own system of thought and belief to be able to defend it, to be able to not fall for everything or anything that's out in the world, in the marketplace. So what the purpose of this series is to show what I had to go through, and to put together my own system and then defend it. And I did this at a later age, which I wish I would have had the information a lot earlier. I wish I would have been trained in this from right at my early academic experience, so that I would know what ideas I could accept or should not accept, and what should I really believe in. What we're basing this series on is a quote from Stephen Jay Gould, where he says, "First, facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. Theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them." Of those four factors, we've gone over culture, and can see how culture really influences how we begin to think. And it lays a tendency that draws us in certain directions. And I could see that plainly as when we went cross-culturally and lived for 25 years in another culture, that they had ways of seeing things that were really different from the way that I saw them. But I had to learn their tendency to be able to teach them in their culture. I went as a teacher, and I had to learn to be able to communicate to that culture and that culture's way of thinking and perceiving. What we've gone over is culture, first one, and that's welt-bild, and how culture influences the thinking patterns. Now we've moved over up to prejudice, and that is prejudging. Before we can judge, we have to have a framework set up. And the first step in our prejudging was the selection of our source of reliable knowledge. And that is a bias. That is a prejudice that we pick. And so, in other words, our choosing of our source of reliable knowledge from the four different sources is one, it's that we can prejudge, but it's also a prejudice that we are prejudiced to pick that out. Pick one of the four sources. And why? Well, because of our cultural tendencies, we have a prejudice towards a certain source of reliable knowledge. So now we're into prejudices, but now we're going to go into the next level of prejudices. We're in the house, and we've done the welt-bild. We've done the epistemological sources, epistemology, which is our source of reliable knowledge. And now we're going up into metaphysics. So don't get lost, just follow the chart. And that epistemology is knowledge. How do we get it? Where does it come from? So we've chosen where it comes from. Now, using that source, we're going to answer the questions of metaphysics. What is metaphysics? Metaphysics establishing the rules and basic beliefs for what is real. Okay, we're formulating now our prejudices. We're kind of subconsciously came into it through our welt-bild, and now we are consciously choosing what are the rules, what is reality. Metaphysics has three sub-branches under it. And those branches are theology, ontology, and universal science. Now, what do those mean? Okay, now don't stay with me here. Don't get lost. Metaphysics has three sub-branches. The first one is theology. We have to answer the question, does God exist? Yes or no. You might say no. Okay, we're done. Game over. for that question. If you say yes, he does exist, then you have to define where does he exist. And it's kind of like, okay, what do you mean? All right, is he within the system or outside the system? Does he have access to the system, or is he outside the system? Is it a closed system or open system? Okay, a Westerner would have a tendency to say if he does exist, he's outside the system, because it's a closed system and the system operates on natural laws, and God cannot intervene or break a law. So God is outside the system. Okay, so he's outside. Can you know a God that's outside the system? And the answer would be no, and he cannot communicate to man in any way because the system is closed. That would be what's called deism. Deism believes in a God, but a God that's outside the system. Somebody else could answer, yes, God exists, but where? God could be in the system, not of the system, but in the system. Okay? How can we know him? Yes, we can know him because he's in the system. He can communicate. So those are the questions that need to be answered under theology. Ontology is what is real. You might be kind of thinking, well, that's what kind of question is that? Well, there are in philosophy people that argue about reality and what is real and what isn't. And we're going to get into that. Like, what is real? Well, is just your thoughts in your mind, is that only what's really real, and everything else you see out here is a projection of your thoughts? Or is there a real world out there that is real and exists whether I think about it or not? Okay, so that's what we're going to get into. That's what ontology is about. What is real? Okay, we have to define that. Then, third one, universal science, the first causes. What caused everything? What is the origin of? So those are the three, and now we just answer them. But from where do we answer those three? From our source of reliable knowledge. That's why we have to have a reliable knowledge source first, and then we go to metaphysics and we answer the questions. And they're easy to answer. They just come right out of your source. So let's go to it. First one, my metaphysics, my theology. God does exist. Why? Because I am choosing biblical parameters. And the biblical parameters come from the Hebrew culture. And the Hebrew culture was very non-Western. And they believed God existed. And God existed within the system. And God communicated with them. So God to them was transcendent, because meaning he was above the system. He existed before the system. And then he created the system. He is not a part of the system. He is above the system. But yet God is immanent, which means God, though being not of the system, can enter into the system of which he created, and therefore God is transcendent and yet immanent. Now there's others that believe then that yes, that God exists and he's transcendent, but he cannot get into the system, so he's not immanent and he can't have any relationship with man. Question to the Hebrews, is he knowable? Yes, because he's within the system, he can communicate. If you have a God that's outside the system, then no, he's not knowable and he can't communicate. But those are all prejudices. What is your prejudice? What is mine? Mine is, like I said, trying to build a biblical framework. So I am assuming a Hebrew cultural standpoint perspective on what is real and what isn't. Is that theology, God is real, God does exist, he is transcendent yet immanent. Is he knowable? Yes, he is. How? By revelation. Now this is what's creeping into the church and seminaries. They believe in maybe a God, but they don't believe that he is able to penetrate the system. And if you can't penetrate the system, then he's not knowable. And if he's not knowable, then how does man know anything? And so a lot of churches and seminaries are assuming the reliable source of intuition. They've abandoned authority. They've abandoned Scripture. They've abandoned that God can communicate. And so they've taken up intuition as a source of knowledge. And what is man's basic problem? Then intuition, he's got bad thinking. He's not thinking right. He has it's a moral problem. So this is where we have differences, and you've got to know where those differences come from and what your system looks like and what it accepts and rejects. This is my system. My system, my metaphysics is theology, God exists. How do I know that? From my source of reliable knowledge, which is external authority, which is God himself as revealed through scriptures. That means he's transcendent yet immanent. He's above the system. He is not a part of the. He's not a rock. He's not a tree. He's none of those. He created those, but he's within the system. Is he knowable? Yes, he's knowable. How? By revelation. How do you answer that question? Metaphysics, number one. Theology. What are your answers, and where did they come from? That's what we're building. This is number 3, and we're going to keep going. And I hope that you stay with me so that we get to the end and we can logically, systematically, which is Western, build our own philosophical system of thought and be able to defend it and be able to accept or reject ideas that are coming into the marketplace, into the church and into the seminaries. And we can say yes or no to them based on our personal standpoint, our personal convictions and beliefs. We're Tim and Holly, and there are the addresses there. And I hope that you stay with me and that you tune in for the next session number 4. We've got 10 sessions to go. Each one takes a different step within the building process. So again, thanks for joining me.